This is part 2 of the 2000-year journey of the Indian economy. Here is a recap of part 1.
India's historical economic journey over 2000 years can be divided into 4 phases. The first phase will be the first millennium. Ancient Indians were world-class farmers, traders, seafarers, manufacturers, innovators, and scientists. India did so well in this era with 32% of the world's GDP. But sadly, things started going wrong in the second phase. The second phase, which is from the 11th century to the 17th century Common Era. So, in this second phase of our story, the Turks and the Turco-Mongols began to invade and India's economic engine started sputtering a bit. Our share of global GDP came down from 32% to 22-23% by the 17th century. But worse was yet to come. Enter the Europeans. The third phase, which tells the story of India's economic journey from the late 17th century to 1947. This third phase saw the most drastic decline in our economy. It came with European colonization. When the European rule began, India's historic economic dominance had reduced a bit, but it was still a formidable trading power known far and wide for its fine cloth, spices, steel, and shipbuilding. Among the biggest commodities for global trade in those days was fabric and cloth. When British rule began, they realized that it was impossible to compete with the fine and rich quality Indian cloth. Dhaka muslin was renowned to be as light as woven air. Dhaka, as you know, is now the capital of Bangladesh. Other great centers of Indian cloth manufacture and trade included Surat on our west coast and Masulipattnam in South India, among others. So the British Raj, to help their own textile industry back in England, began systematically destroying the cotton and cloth manufacturing centers in India, crippling our entire textile industry. They did this through price fixing, basically forcing Indians to sell their cloth at very cheap prices only to the British. Then there were heavy taxes on Indian weavers and cloth manufacturers, leaving very little money for them to invest in better equipment. Further, they imposed heavy custom duties on Indian cloth exports to the UK, but almost no custom duties on cloth imported from the UK to India. Now they speak of free trade, but at that time, this British Raj trade was anything but free. Lastly, there was tremendous violence on Indian weavers and cloth manufacturers who did not comply. Things got so terrible that many of the Indian weavers actually cut their own thumbs so that they could not be forced to produce cloth. Before 1700 Common Era, India exported 25% of the world's fabric. At the end of British rule in 1947, it was down to just 2%. Meanwhile, Britain was of course on a roll, shipping goods to India practically duty-free. Essentially, the British would buy raw materials such as cotton at dirt cheap rates, forcing Indian farmers into poverty. Then they would take that cotton to the UK, convert that cotton to cloth in their factories, and then force India to buy this cloth without any customs duties, because Indians would have no other options. There was no free market here. It was a complete monopoly of the worst kind, being done at a country level, something that had never been done before in human history. And the British did this in many other industries as well, not just with cloth. The worst part, they financed this entire looting operation with Indian money, since they took our money through ridiculously high tax rates. Indians literally paid for their own oppression.
By the end of the 19th century, the fact is that India was already Britain's biggest cash cow, the world's biggest purchaser of British goods and exports, and the source of highly paid employment for British civil servants. We literally paid for our own oppression.
That was Dr. Tharoor, whose book Inglorious Empire on the British Raj I would strongly recommend. But the crimes that the British did were not just economic. To make things worse, the massive famines that were caused and executed by the British Raj led to the deaths of over 35 million Indians between 1757 and 1947. The last one being the Great Bengal Famine of 1943 that led to the deaths of 3 million of our fellow Indians by estimates. One can imagine the devastation this caused in our land. Having said that, we must admit that our dramatic decline in the world economy is not just about the British pushing us down with their oppression. In parallel, the West also shot ahead due to their innovations. Their industrialization was of course based on the deindustrialization of colonies like India. But European countries saw massive growth at home with the Industrial Revolution in the UK and Netherlands, and later in France, Germany, and various other places like the US, which of course shot ahead of everyone else a bit later. But it's not all about the foreigners being cruel to us. There were some faults in us as well. Perhaps the biggest being our lack of unity, which allowed a small island to rule us for so long. They used our own people, trained them as soldiers loyal to them, and then oppressed us through those soldiers. They used our own money to exploit us. A lesson we must remember. Ghar ka bhedi, Lanka dhai. We must never repeat the mistake of internal divisions that our ancestors made. Anyway, the net result of all this was that by the time India got independence in 1947, our share of global GDP had collapsed. We have data from the Madison Project database only for 1940 and 1950, not for the exact year 1947. In 1940, India's share of global GDP was 5.5%. By 1947, with the chaos of the partition violence, it would have only been lower. We had become one of the poorest countries on earth. Think about it. 1,000 years ago, India was 32% of the world's GDP. And after 1,000 years of foreign rule over many parts of the Indian subcontinent, first the Turks and then the British, we had drastically collapsed to just 5.5%. But from 15th August 1947, the foreigners were finally not in power. Power was in Indian hands, our hands. You'd think that at least now we would finally start becoming economically stronger compared to the rest of the world. Sadly, that's not what happened. And now we come to the fourth phase of India's 2,000-year economic journey, the period from 1947 to 1991. Now, the story of the fourth phase from 1947 to 1991, you will be shocked to know that our relative economic decline continued. In this phase, our share of global GDP as per the Madison Project database fell to its lowest point in human history at 3.1%. The Turks brought our share of the global GDP down from 32% to 23%. The British took it even further down from 23% to 5.5%. And sadly, our own modern Indian socialist rulers brought it further down from 5.5% to 3.1%. What went wrong between 1947 and 1991? The answer is one word: socialism. In 1947, we got political freedom. We could choose our own leaders. The vote was given to every Indian. The government had no right to decide on who we could vote for. Foreigners wouldn't rule us. But the story in the economic area was different. We did not get economic freedom. We couldn't decide freely by ourselves what we wanted to do with our money. We couldn't start a business by ourselves if we wanted to. The government or some bureaucrat would decide for us by issuing licenses. In the 1950s and 1960s, socialist levies on rice millers and sugar mills hurt farmers. Insane level of taxes, up to 97.5%. Can you believe that? 97.5% taxes. Obviously, such high level of taxes led to a black money economy. Nationalization turned profitable, well-run companies into inefficient ones that made perpetual losses, like Air India. We made 5-year Soviet-style national economic plans, which achieved little. Yes, we didn't have foreigners running our economy, but we did have a foreign philosophy to rule our economy. That is socialism or communism, whatever you want to call it. Socialism emerged in Europe during the French Revolution and with the ideas of Karl Marx. That's why it's also called Marxism sometimes. I'm sure there are minutiae of how people differentiate between Marxism, communism, and socialism. I don't know about that. What I know is they all cause economic disaster. Any case, wherever socialism has been tried, it has almost always led to economic disaster. Even China was suffering economically when it was socialist and finally started becoming richer when it gave up socialist controls in 1979. Now, they say they're a socialist country with Chinese characteristics, but let's be clear, China is not really socialist. It's a state capitalist economy. So, socialism at its core is about suspicion and hatred towards private businessmen. And also that the government will decide everything on the economy. The government will occupy the commanding heights of the economy. That's the logic. In fact, even profit was thought of as a bad word. India's first Prime Minister was Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. He did many good things, no doubt. It has become fashionable to run him down these days. That, I think, is unfair. He did many good things. One will not deny that. But his economic record can be questioned. And you would be shocked to know he'd actually said on record to a renowned businessman, J.R.D. Tata, never talk to me about the word profit. It is a dirty word. Can you imagine that in a country where Goddess Lakshmi is worshipped, we were saying that profit is a dirty word? And the reason was that apparently the government wanted to help the poor. The reason for all these philosophies and socialism was that the government wanted to help the poor. But if there's no profit, then the government will not have the money to help the poor. As a result, the number of poor people in India kept rising during this socialist phase. Do you know that India's poverty rate, that is, the percentage of our population living in extreme poverty, actually became worse after the British left? In 1940, the percentage of Indians living in extreme poverty was 53%. In 1970, after 23 years of socialism, the percentage living in extreme poverty had gone up to 67%. Whenever, wherever socialism has been tried, poverty usually becomes worse. Another modern example, Venezuela. Our economy's growth rate was so bad that by 1980, our share of global GDP was just 3.1%. This is the lowest ever in human history for the Indian economy relative to the rest of the world. Even worse than the British period. This bad GDP growth rate from 1950s to 1980s was sarcastically called the Hindu rate of growth by the Delhi School of Economics professor Raj Krishna. This was unfair, frankly, really unfair. It should have actually been called the socialist rate of growth because it was a result of the socialist policies followed by Indian governments of many parties from 1947 to 1991. The actual Hindu rate of growth is what happened after 1991, when the dead hand of socialism was taken back just a little bit. What happened in 1991? A crisis erupted, a crisis that was the result of failed socialist policies of the first few decades of Indian independence. By 1985, India began facing some serious balance of payments issues. Balance of payments is a highfalutin term for basically we started facing a shortfall of US dollar reserves with which we could pay for our imports. Most importantly, the import of oil. By the end of 1980, things had escalated to a full-blown economic crisis. To make matters worse, the Gulf War happened around the same time. This led to a massive surge in oil prices that only added fuel to the fire there. Sorry, no pun intended. Actually, no, there is a pun intended. Sorry about that. Very bad joke. Anyway, coming back. As you know, India has very little oil of its own and we import most of our oil. The modern economy of practically all countries needs oil as its lifeblood. Without oil, the economy freezes. So think of the double whammy crisis that happened to us, to India, in 1991. We had a shortage of US dollar reserves, which we needed to buy oil. And the price of oil had also shot up at that very same time. The situation was so bad that our Indian government had to airlift its gold reserves to London and Switzerland to be collateral for an emergency loan. Basically, नौबत यहाँ तक आ गई थी कि सरकार को देश का सोना गिरवी रखना पड़ा था. We were on the brink of bankruptcy. We have faced such crises repeatedly over the last 1000 years of economic decline. But this time, our country, our great India, turned the crisis into an opportunity. आपदा को हमने अवसर में तब्दील कर दिया. With economic liberalization, we started growing like we hadn't in 1000 years. I won't go into the details of the policy reforms and how that turbo boosted our economy from 1991 till today, that is 2024. That is a subject for another episode and वो भी करेंगे. But the results of this economic growth are obvious. Remember the percentage of people living under extreme poverty that had worsened in the first few decades of Indian independence to 67%? Well, today it is less than just 3%. And with our growth rate, even that extreme poverty will disappear very soon. Remember our global share of GDP that had fallen to just 3.1% in 1980, our lowest ever in human history. Today, just a few decades after liberalization, India's GDP has risen to around 8%. India's GDP has risen to around 8% of the world's GDP, according to the Madison Project database. Today, according to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, India shines as a global growth leader, the fastest growing large economy on the planet. In 2022, India crossed the GDP of our former colonial master, the UK. Taaliyan, bhai. And at the rate we are growing, we will cross Japan and Germany within a few years. Only the US and China will be ahead of us. But we should not assume that this growth is our birthright. Nothing is a birthright. We have to continue working hard. We must innovate. We must manufacture more. We must build infrastructure. We must grow our services even more. We must trade confidently with the world like our ancestors did. We must fire the immense energy of our youth. We have to ensure that we keep encouraging our entrepreneurs and businessmen. And most importantly, we must stay united. Never again should we allow foreigners to destroy our land as happened in the last 1000 years. Regardless of the religion you practice, the community you're from, or the language you speak, if you're Indian, you're one of us. We must have that attitude. If you're Indian, you're one of us. As I said earlier, today's India contributes around 8% of the world's GDP. This was the exact same situation in 1900 Common Era, that is 124 years ago. We have recovered all that we lost since 1900 Common Era in a little over 30 years, that's it. We have to make sure that we get back to 32% of the world's GDP soon. That's where we were 1000 years ago when we were the most powerful economy on earth. And that's where we will return in some decades. So this was the Immortal India podcast with me, Amish. If you like this episode, like and share it, please. And if you want to receive the notification for the next episode, click subscribe on this link. This podcast is supported by the Dilip Piramal Foundation. The Dilip Piramal Foundation is an initiative by renowned industrialist Dilip Piramal to support dharmic causes across India and the world. In this aim, the foundation has supported art galleries, documentaries, dharamshalas, education, and many other such initiatives.